Rock and roll. The nature of the inquiry was far beyond anything else any of us had worked on before, far beyond a normal homicide inquiry. And the government said, whatever you need, just ask a question. And I think I may have related to you about the photocopier fax machine. Did I tell you that story? One day, a fax photocopier machine turned up, a brand new one. Now, in 1985, we didn't have any faxes or photocopiers, and it was about as big as this table, and it was wrapped with plastic, and we were like, wow, that is so awesome. Two of my police friends came up to me and they said, we heard you guys have got a photocopy and fax machine. And I went, yeah. And they said, can we see it? And I said, yeah, come on. And we walked around it and they were looking at it and going, wow, that is so cool. And they went, how does it go? And I said, I don't know. None of us knew how to work it. So it sat there for months. I don't know if it ever got used, but we were very proud as an inquiry to actually own a fax photocopier machine. The resources that were given to that inquiry were spectacular. With that, there was a certain pressure. We were dealing with a serious crime. We had to catch who did it.
In New Zealand tonight, police are launching a major investigation into the explosions aboard the Rainbow Warrior.
We consider this to be a scandal of the nuclear age.
This was no accident. Somebody, somewhere, decided they wanted to blow up our boat.
Things like this just don't happen in New Zealand.
When you're powerful, you don't have to pay for your crimes.
Murderers can't go unpunished. They've got to be exposed.
We were one little South Pacific country. We never had a crime like that. It was just huge.
The sinking of the Rainbow Warrior on the Auckland waterfront has now touched off a police inquiry on a scale never seen in this country before.
I'd just like to welcome you to Operation Rainbow.
The man put in charge of the inquiry was Detective Superintendent Alan Galbraith, a dour Scotsman, very good leader.
As soon as it became known that this had been sabotaged, the investigation really got ramped up. The most important of my police career.
Are you optimistic of bringing the people who bombed the Rainbow Warrior to justice?
Oh yes, we're very optimistic that we'll be successful in the end.
Why are you so optimistic?
Well, giving it everything we've got.
In Operation Rainbow headquarters, the Rainbow Squad is handling a wide range of inquiries.
Very quickly, Alan put together a huge team of detectives. One of them was Detective Inspector Maurice Whittam, very clever guy.
We had a lot of staff from out of town seconded to Auckland just solely to boost our numbers. We were 140 officers at one stage.
Terry Batchelor was my detective sergeant. He was a bit of a feared man in criminal circles back in those days, tremendously strong.
From the police department, can you open the door, please? We realised at one point the eyes of the world were upon little old New Zealand. I mean, some people hadn't even heard of New Zealand. And that in itself was a motivation. And it was absolutely critical for everyone to find out who did it.
We were suddenly thrown into one of the biggest police inquiries New Zealand has ever seen.
The inevitable speculation on who could be responsible has begun. The list of enemies Greenpeace has made over the years is long.
Your guess is as good as mine.
Could be the Russians, could be the Chinese, could be the French, could be the Americans, could be anyone.
one possible clue arrived by post. A leaflet purporting to come from veterans of Vietnam and Africa threatened a number of left-wing and liberal groups with the words, "We'll crude you all," like the Rainbow Warrior.
Overseas organisations, foreign countries, they were all possible suspects. We even had a couple of unusual characters who were in Auckland at the time. I remember one was an American, and he was particularly anti-Greenpeace. He was pro-nuclear, and he had been seen in Auckland.
The bombing obviously required an explosive device. Well, in New Zealand, we've got a lot of rural activity, and there's a lot of explosives used. A couple of sticks of gelignite might be quite handy if I had to move a little hill or change the direction of a riverside. There's a lot of things being blown up all around the place.
What are your views at the moment as to the validity, if you like, of the Better Dead Than Red document? Do you think there's any chance that the people who sent that did in fact do it?
I don't know.
At this point, we didn't know why, who, or how.
Have you got any leads which give you any hope at all?
Well, there's always hope.
The area is still cordoned off to the public, but from the other side of the pier, one can clearly see the partly sunken ship. Stunned Greenpeace members say the vessel was priceless, but right now they're still mourning for their dead colleague who went down with the vessel.
It was the first thing that led the news on the radio, on the television. There was, you know, a little space to kind of let things process. But we had wasn't a service, it was just some time with Fernando in a coffin in a church in Auckland. Just us.
It was all so unreal at that point. We had an hour. And at the end of the hour, the priest or whatever he was came in and said, "Gosh, you got to go. I got to make room for the next group." And we had to physically pick up his coffin and walk it out the door. And that's when the weight of the world sank down on my shoulders, and I think everybody else's, because then it was 100% sure they were picking up the body of a dead friend and sending him on his last trip. And it was tough.
He and I did watch together a couple of times. His kids were young. He talked about them quite a bit. Yeah, he was a dad who loved his kids.
The evening after we carried Fernando out of the church, we had a party and it danced, and people just burned off steam and frustration and anger. I just remember being so completely overwhelmed by the whole situation. The having lost a friend, having lost a ship. It just made no sense at all.
Please. Is your call to Hastings? Go ahead, please. Okay, fine. Just a moment.
When we found that the New Zealand public were very, very happy to try and help the police.
Thank you. One moment, please.
The next day, suddenly the members of the public started ringing in, reporting sightings, and it really started to go quite crazy.
It's to do with Rainbow. Yes, Hastings. Would you hold the line for Auckland, please? Okay.
But then that afternoon, the late shift inquiry sergeant came to see us, and just as a matter of passing, he said, "Oh, did you hear about the thing that happened down the wharf last night, down near the waterfront?"
Some guys at the yacht club had been having a number of thefts off boats in the middle of the night. So a few of them decided to stay overnight at the yacht squadron headquarters and just keep an eye on things and see if they could perhaps identify who was responsible for the break-ins. During the course of their observations on the night of the bombing, they noticed a camper van that looked extremely suspicious.
The people in sight, they were assisting somebody in pulling up a dinghy from the sea up into a sort of a raised sloping bank before leaving. The neighbourhood watch then called the police.
Police went down there, found the Zodiac tied to a tree, and they seized the Zodiac.
But on the night, it didn't mean a great deal to anybody, as it was before the actual bombing. But fortuitously, the neighbourhood watch, they were able to get the registration number of that van.
The camper van was registered to a company called Newman's. They were contacted and they were able to identify from the records that the vehicle had been rented by Swiss tourists. A married couple, Alain and Sophie Turenges. This was the first really significant lead. We were, from that point, on the lookout for that vehicle, wanting to speak to this couple.
In 1985, I was 21. So I'd been working at Newman's Rentals for about 3 or 4 months, and I was a meet and greet girl. So I met Alain and Sophie Turenges. They'd already had their camper van for a few days, and then they'd got a broken windscreen. And so they turned up at the depot, that we'd put them into a replacement vehicle, and that was that. A few days later, I got a phone call. And it was the police. And they asked me about the meeting that I'd had with Alain Turenges and Sophie Turenges a few days before. Can you describe what they looked like? Did they say where they'd been? They gave no indication what it was about, and I didn't ask. I just, assumed it wasn't my business. The next morning, I arrived at work about 8 o'clock, and I said to another girl, I said, "Oh, do you remember the Turenges?" And she said, "Yeah, that's them over there." They were all sitting in the waiting area. Yeah, it was a big shock to see them. So that was when it got a bit interesting. The other girl, she said they were dropping off their vehicle early, and I said, "Look, I had a phone call last night about them. They're wanted by the police." And she just immediately reached for the phone.
I remember it was a rainy day in Auckland. It was a rainy, dark, sort of gloomy day. We had a phone call quite early from Newman's to say, "Those people you are looking for in the camper van are in our office now. What would you like us to do?" Basically, we were like, keep them there. Think of whatever reason you can, but keep them there.
She said, "Okay, we've got to keep them." And then very quickly I thought, if someone brings a vehicle back early, they actually get the money refunded. So I thought we could use that as an excuse to keep them. So, I mean, my face, I'm not good at telling lies, and hiding things. But at that stage, I think I just knew I had to stay calm. And so I walked over to them. Alain Turenges was very friendly, very charming, chatty. And we said, "We owe you some money because you're dropping off your vehicle earlier than you'd booked it, and we need to wait for a manager to come in and sign the cheques." I think it was only about $130. If they had said, "Look, forget it, just take us to the airport," I don't know what I would have done. But they accepted that. And then I was sort of seeing other customers and waiting for the police to arrive.
We had to get there at speed. This was huge for us.
So we dashed down to the car park, which was about 4 levels below us. And we got to our car, but we didn't have the keys.
Have you got the keys? No, I thought you had the keys.
We're going to lose them.
And we're like, ah! In the washing bay, there was a guy who used to look after all the cars. He had a brand new Commodore sitting in there, which belonged to one of the big bosses.
I thought, well, here's a car. He had the keys on his belt, so I took the keys like that, and he turned around like this, and I said, big case, and we drove away. And he was most put out, but we were on a mission.
So the time was dragging on, waiting for the police. The other girl and I were both getting a bit nervous. Ellen Turenges, she came up to the counter a couple of times to ask how things were going. So I was starting to feel a little bit of pressure.
There was heavy traffic. We were driving in a police car that didn't have sirens and lights and all that sort of stuff. It was taking ages to get there. It was a terrifying thought that, you know, we could miss them.
After a while, men started arriving at work who were obviously managers, you know, they're wearing suits and ties. I looked up and Ellen Turenges was standing looking at me very intently. That was really frightening. At that moment, I did have a bit of a flip of the stomach. But I tried to be really cool about it. And then next thing, the room just seemed to be filled with tall men in suits.
We burst into the reception area behind Terry. Us littler guys could hide behind him.
I just said, they're right behind you. They walked over to Ellen and Sophie Turenges.
We identified ourselves as police officers and told them that we wished to speak to them about an unspecified matter.
Unfortunately, with some reluctance, they said yes.
What did you think they'd done?
In my mind, I decided they'd been poaching trout in Lake Taupo.
We returned with the Turenges to Auckland Central Police Station, where we prepared to formally interview them.
I was in charge of questioning Alan Turenges. So I interviewed him off and on for about 22 hours.
They were kept apart so that their stories could be given individually. They couldn't collaborate.
You had to be methodical and meticulous. If you're too hasty, you miss things. And so I asked him logical questions.
What is your full name? Alain Turenges. What is the purpose of your visit? Holiday. Sophie, can you tell me where you were born?
Geneva.
What was the date of your marriage? 6th of September, 1975. Well, how long have you been married?
10 years.
What date did you get married?
September. About the 6th.
Alain Turenges was cool, calm, collected. There's a thing called a Gaelic shrug, where they go, and he came out with it a lot. She wasn't very cooperative either.
It would help us if we knew more about you.
What do you want to know?
Tell us about your husband.
What do you mean?
What does he like to do? What are his interests?
I do not talk about my husband.
Then I started to ask him about the waterfront. What were they doing there? And he said that they had had an argument. So he got out of the van to cool off a bit. And then he saw a fisherman who was dragging a dinghy up on the rocks.
I want to get back to this night in question. Where and when did you see the man that you helped? When I was walking back to the van.
And what did he say?
He said for me to help him pull his dinghy out of the water. He said his name was Peter.
What happened then?
I helped him pull the boat from the water and asked him where he was going. He said he had his car near there and he was going to it.
What then?
I offered to take him to it.
You offered him, a complete stranger, you in a foreign land. That was very good of you.
Yes.
Why?
I don't know, I can't say.
Perhaps you knew him, Alan. That would explain it.
No.
And so I asked him, Peter the fisherman, where did he sit in the van?
At the front.
Why in the front? Why not in the back?
So that he could tell my wife where to drive to?
While Terry was speaking with Alan, Sophie was also asked about the man they had picked up from the waterfront.
When the man was in the van, where was he sitting?
In the back.
Your husband said he was sitting in the front.
I don't know. He was in the back.
They were giving conflicting accounts, and it was a simple question: where did the guy sit in the van? And they couldn't get it right.
That, of course, is overwhelmingly suspicious.
Your wife says you were next to her in the front and the man you helped in the back. Which is it?
I am sure I was in the back. What do you want me to say?
How about the truth?
You're getting it.
So even from that early stage in the interview, you start to build a picture that you're talking with two people who are not telling the truth. I think throughout that process, you, as a detective, you're looking for signs, and the way they interacted with each other was surprising.
They didn't comfort each other to any great extent. They didn't behave like married people. So all these little bits, they all created a huge suspicion in our minds. But we had nothing concrete on them at all.
Detective Superintendent Alan Galbraith briefs his team of 66 detectives at the start of another day in the search to find the bombers of the Rainbow Warrior.
We were still questioning the Turenges, and it soon became clear that we needed more solid evidence. So we went public.
Police are releasing only little information, but it's known they're keenly interested in this Newman's rented camper van seen in the area not long before the bombings.
We want to locate where this vehicle has been, hopefully trace people who have had any contact with the occupants.
What areas was this van in?
We suspect in Auckland, North Auckland, and down as far as perhaps Hamilton.
Next day, we get a ring from a couple of forestry workers up in Te Puni Forest and said, "Oh, you're interested in the camper van? We'll tell you a little story about a camper van."
The man said a couple of days before the bombing, he was working in a forest car park when he saw a Newman's camper van pull up, wait a short while, and then drive off. A short time later, a grey estate car arrived with several men in it. The workman felt it was a little suspicious, so he wrote down the registration number of this grey estate car on his truck in the dust.
I said to the guy, "Oh, is the number still there?" He said, "Oh, we've had some thunderstorms and it's probably washed off by now."
There it is there, LR 8114.
We found out it had been rented from a hire company.
The rental car company had rented it out to people with French passports. There was 4 people in total. There was Xavier Manigay, Eric Audron, Jean-Michel Bertello, and Raymond Welch.
And they'd given their address as a yacht. the Ouvea. So the Ouvea immediately became of interest to us.
The bombing occurred on the night of the 10th of July, and when we contacted customs, they told us that the Ouvea yacht had left New Zealand the day before the bombing on the 9th of July. So they couldn't have been the actual guys who planted the bombs. But we were sure at that stage that somehow these people could be connected with the bombing.
We wanted to know about all their movements over the period that they were in the north of New Zealand, which is sparsely populated. You might think you could operate there at leisure almost and wouldn't be detected. People wouldn't be interested. The police wouldn't be able to investigate because, after all, it was a backwater. Well, got it totally wrong.
The Ouvea crew attracted attention to themselves by various things that they did that were unusual.
The story essentially was that they were on holiday on a diving trip, although there was no evidence of any diving having been done. Because it was midwinter in New Zealand.
New Zealand in July, it's very cold, the seas are rough, it's not good for diving. It was suspicious, very suspicious.
French-speaking males in northern New Zealand, they were rather exotic, noticeable, shall we say. They certainly appeared to have enjoyed themselves when they came ashore. They mingled very freely and openly with locals.
One character had a romantic interlude with a policeman's wife. They had a great old time.
They were getting photographed by females on many occasions.
Made their presence felt, if you like.
They sort of didn't act as if they were here for a job, but something didn't seem right. We needed to speak to those people pretty quickly.
Inspector Galbraith, who was in charge of the investigation, was determined not to screw it up. Within 2 or 3 days of the explosion, nobody was allowed on the dock or near the boat. He controlled who was coming and who was going and what was happening. But the boat was heeling over on the dock. And the police didn't want the masts on a boat that they didn't know how strong was anymore. So we went out there and took the mast down.
Peter, you went aboard the Rainbow Warrior this morning. What sort of scene greeted you?
Well, primarily everything was covered in diesel fuel, soaking wet. It was smelly, very slippery just to walk around. It doesn't look good. I think all the woodwork on the boat will have to be redone, torn out.
To be taking all that stuff apart and at some point realizing it was probably never going back on, it was just really, that was tough. And I was sitting there just bummed out and depressed. I remember being very upset about Fernando. But I remember thinking he enjoyed being a part of Greenpeace, being a part of trying to change these issues that we were changing. And I started picking up the pieces and going on. I decided I don't want to sit around and do nothing. We have to get to Moroa. I didn't want to be stopped by the people that did it.
All I know is there were people who didn't want to see us sail to Moroa. But if they think that they can stop this, it's a big mistake. Because you can kill people, you can sink ships, you can't kill spirits. And the spirit of warrior is still there.
To make a statement, we had to sail. We weren't going to give up.
By that stage, there was obviously questions about international involvement. The Turenges and the Ouvea crew were all native French speakers.
In terms of Greenpeace's enemies, if you will, the hot topic at that time was the French nuclear testing at Mourning atoll. So in terms of people being upset with Greenpeace, I would say France at that time were the #1 contenders.
The Turenges were remanded in custody, but the Ouvea crew, we needed to get our hands on them pretty quickly. Customs told us that the Ouvea had been located in Norfolk Island, which is a small island close to Australia.
And we were flying across to Norfolk Island and we tracked them down to one of the local motels. And, you know, to be fair, we were just a motley group of police that were available to suddenly fly out of New Zealand. So we weren't like some trained, highly trained team of motel stormers or anything else like that. So we liaised with the motel owner. It was getting quite late at night at that stage. And we put a bit of a plan together. A couple of teams of us were going to storm the 2 units that the members of the Ouvea were then at that time asleep in. So we were talking about kicking in the doors and all of that sort of drama. And I remember the motel owner saying, "Would you like the keys for the door?" And we go, "Oh yeah, that'd be great, thanks." It was dark. They were in bed asleep. So we quietly opened the door and then we burst into their units. They were immediately alert. They were ready for action. They were guys that could have provided a fair bit of resistance or force back at us had they decided to. Fortunately for us, they didn't. They were detained and then returned back to the Norfolk Island police station. We took their passports to have them checked out. But Norfolk is administered by the Australian government, so we were under a 24-hour deadline. At the end of 24 hours, you had to either charge them with an offence or release them. The pressure was on all of us involved in the interviews. We needed something significant or we had to let them go. You're looking for signs, their body, their facial expressions, how they react to different questions. Sitting in the room with these guys, we became aware that these men were very capable, quite military, quite trained. And after talking to them or being with them for a little while, you could clearly see they were anything but tourists. And gradually you start to wonder, who the hell am I dealing with here?
Parce que nous sommes des vrais professionnels. Nous connaissons les risques. Nous savons les conséquences. C'est notre métier. Bon, moi, je faisais partie d'une unité force spéciale. Ils font partie du service d'action de la DGSE. En tant qu'équipage du Ouvea. Dans ma mission, c'était de transporter du matériel d'un point A à un point B. On l'emmène et on le livre, et puis c'est fini, quoi. On n'en parle pas. Je n'ai pas le sentiment d'avoir fait quelque chose de criminel. C'est pas que j'imagine, j'en suis sûr, hein, c'est servir. On sait très bien que, bon, on se dit, à partir du moment où c'est un acte terroriste avec la mort d'un homme. Et ceux qui se font prendre, bon, qu'ils finiraient en prison qu'ils finiraient en prison. Et quand la police néo-zélandaise, qui avait débarqué à Norfolk, nous a arrêtés, on imagine plus des années de prison. Voilà, il y a toutes sortes on est préparé à ce genre de choses.
The crew of the Ouvea, these men were very staunch, evasive. They would revert back to French speaking when any question became difficult. You couldn't find an angle that could get past that frontage on them.
Vous êtes embarqués, bon, qu'est-ce que vous voulez faire? Vous continuez à vous manifester, mais donc vous essayez de prendre. Vous êtes dans l'attitude de quelqu'un tout à fait innocent qui est appréhendé sur une fausse information. Le but étant de traîner.
We had not learnt anything of any significance. Nothing had come back on the passports. We just didn't have enough to arrest them. Clearly, if you've got no evidence, then they need to be released. We had to let them go. It's one of the most disappointing moments of my police career, watching them rowing out to their boat, to the Ouvea.
Si à Norfolk, ils avaient eu un jour ou deux de plus, il est certain que nos identités n'auraient pas tenu et nous aurions été arrêtés. Bien entendu, on se sent d'une certaine façon soulagé d'être reparti, d'être en mer.
I remember standing there thinking, I'm sure these guys work for the French Secret Service, but can we prove it?
On the day that we picked up the Turenges, we sent the details of both the passports and the licenses to Interpol. The Swiss came back very quickly and said that these are good forgeries, but both the passports and the licenses were totally false. It meant we could charge them with immigration charges.
But who were these people? How did they fit into the bombing? And who were they associated with? Where do we need to look next?
What is your real name? I want to talk to you by your real first name.
Just Sophie.
Who do you work for?
I think you know.
From the way you talk, you must work for the French government intelligence, or something similar.
Yes. But I cannot tell you.
I want to know what your involvement in the bombing is.
I cannot say.
If you're not the main person in this bombing, we can try to get immunity for you. Do you understand that?
Yes. But it is a trick.
That it's murder. Someone has died. We must know your involvement. You must help yourself. If you were not the one that put the bomb on that boat, it is better for you. You understand?
Of course.
I want to know who has been working with you besides Alan.
That is not for me to say.
Mr. Galbraith, are you any closer to solving the crime?
I think we are reasonably close, but there's a great deal of work we have to do yet. We've collected a lot of evidence. It really just needs the right piece of evidence, and perhaps the thing would fall into place.
We had been working tirelessly, but still had no idea who was part of that demolition crew who actually attached these bombs to the boat. There was some detailed examination of the wharf, divers looking for clues and other things that might help the inquiry.
So far, about 500 pieces of material have been brought up from the harbour floor. Even the minutest objects are being examined. One vital clue is an outboard motor found submerged in Hobson Bay.
Here we can see the Yamaha outboard engine that was dumped in the water. That was obviously connected to the Zodiac that was recovered. But we couldn't believe what we found next. We found a dive bottle just dumped in the grass.
The oxygen bottle would have been used by divers, and they were pure white. On one of the oxygen bottles located was a black, heavy denier pantyhose. You can only assume that it was a camouflage thing.
Here we have the equipment that was probably used by those who were responsible for placing the explosives on the boat. But who was it that actually wore it? The crew of the Ouvea left New Zealand the day before the Rainbow Warrior was actually blown up. So clearly they'd fulfilled their part of the mission. We think at this time that was delivery of the gear required to carry out the operation. The Turenges were present at the waterfront the night of the bombing. The fact that they uplifted the Zodiac out of the sea, we think it was their job to transport that stuff after the bombs went off. But who was this diver or person that they'd picked up out of the water who actually planted the explosives to carry out the bombing of the Rainbow Warrior?
C'est moi qui a placé des explosifs sur le Rainbow Warrior. Le but, c'est de réussir la mission sans jamais se faire prendre.
The net was closing in, and we were really confident that we were going to find them.
Il y avait un problème avec mon passeport. Donc on s'est dit, là, c'est parti, c'est la chasse aux Français.
On a voulu brouiller les pistes. On a fabriqué un montage.
Ils ont identifié comme agent secret français. Ce serait terrorisme d'État qui a fait le coup. C'était le feuilleton de l'été.